Welcome to Out of My Mouth, the program where raw thoughts meet unfiltered conversations.
Join us as we dive into the depths of human experience, where we share stories, perspectives, and insights that just might challenge the status quo.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and ponder the world around you like never before. This is Out of My Mouth.
The views and opinions of our guest and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of New Thought Media Network, or any organization we may be affiliated with. Here at New Thought Media Network, we welcome freedom of speech and courageous conversations. There are many topics that can be difficult to navigate. Challenging the status quo and engaging in lively debate is important to expanding our understanding of one another, and life in general. Creating a peaceful world doesn't happen because no one disagrees, it happens from a willingness to understanding one another. In our programming, we strive to expand consciousness and assist people in creating remarkable lives. Your comments are welcome at info@ntmedia.org.
Good afternoon and welcome to Out of My Mouth. I'm Barbara Jean.
And I'm Cheryl Rogers.
And let us begin with our land acknowledgement. As we gather today, we acknowledge that we're standing on the historical land of the Wendat peoples, and more recently that of the Mississaugas and the Haudenosaunee nations. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island. May we walk alongside our Indigenous family, recognizing our shared stewardship of the earth. Let us carry forward the spirit of unity, understanding, and resilience that we've been reminded of through our reflections. Let us hold in our hearts the intention to learn, to support, and to advocate for justice and sovereignty for us all. In doing so, we acknowledge our interconnectedness and the strength that comes from standing together in truth, respect, and love. May this intention guide us in our actions and thoughts, inspiring us to contribute to a world where the dignity and rights of all are honored. Let us be mindful of the role we play in this ongoing journey towards healing and unity. And by making this acknowledgement, we strive to be allies and take an active part in reconciliation by honoring the land, the history, as well as the unique heritage and culture of the Indigenous peoples. This fosters our commitment to create a world that works for the highest and best good of all life. Please take a moment to acknowledge your personal commitment to the land you are on and the path you choose to walk going forward. Miigwech.
Miigwech. And now it is my pleasure and my privilege to introduce our guest speaker, Reverend Jenn Shepherd. And Reverend Jenn is a dedicated spiritual leader with a rich background in history, religious studies, and education. Her professional journey includes over decades of teaching 7th and 8th grade history and science, which has shaped her approach to ministry and teaching spiritually. Jenn is also the co-founder of Bolts of Love, a program that fosters inclusion and healing by bridging the gap between traditional church communities and those who identify as spiritual but not religious. There is so much more about Jenn that you can find on her website, and Deja will post that here for you. I do want to let you know that she is also holds a certification in Qigong healing, grief education, integral ministry, and is recognized as a spiritual healer. She actively participates in teaching spirituality, self-development, healing, and mediumship at Unity of Edinburgh. So welcome, Jenn.
Hello.
Welcome, Jenn.
So good to have you here. Thank you so much.
It is really great to be here.
Mhm. So I was just at a convention with Jenn, and we got chatting, and we decided to do this as a last minute thing. And I'm so excited, Jenn. Thank you for saying yes.
Yeah. It's exciting. I'm used to doing things that are pre-recorded, so out of my comfort zone we go. So here we go.
Isn't that what it's all about? About
Really,
stretching our
yeah,
comfort zone?
it really, really is. Yeah, and I love because at the beginning with your video, I mean that's what it's all about, right? Is
Yeah.
saying it in the moment and knowing that you can have a
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. It's a journey.
Yes, it is. And
Yeah.
that's why it's called Out of My Mouth. And that's why we also have that disclaimer, because, what comes out of my mouth is something that's not always, um, how can I say, we
Accepted by YouTube.
yeah, accepted by YouTube. Thank you. We got taken. One of our shows got taken down um,
Oh,
during that time that we mentioned the C word. And
The pandemic. Don't talk about the pandemic.
wow.
yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy?
Mm.
Yeah, so we were going to talk today about perceptions, interpretations, and definitions, and how our life experience really impacts the lens that we filter through, how we see things, how we interpret things, how we explain things, and how we respond to things.
Exactly. Exactly. It all boils down to awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So,
And
do you want to elaborate a little bit more about how that happens?
how, how that
How
happens in awareness.
well,
Um,
how our perceptions are formed
yeah,
from different
from
areas
from
of our
birth,
life.
really, from
Mhm.
birth. I mean, we interpret the best way we can interpret for the stage of our life that we're at. Like growing up, we have different stages. As adults, we can choose or not to choose to keep growing and expanding and healing and moving, or but especially as children, when those stages are so apparent,
Mhm.
we don't always have the tools to interpret things too close to what they really are. And we can take on stories, we can take on perceptions that we can figure out later, that and refine them. So like a real simple one to get a hold of is like the tooth fairy.
Mhm.
If wherever the tooth fairy is and the tooth fairy is doing its thing, but somewhere along the line we recognize it's not really the way we thought, it's not a magical whatever, it's some human intervention on our caretaker's part to help us through that stage of life by playing the tooth fairy. So but we do that all the time though,
Yeah.
with everything. And
Mhm.
so right down from our TV shows we watch to the people that we like to walk with and talk with, the the family we grew up in, our nationalities, our culture, our countries, our language, it all feeds into that, on how we decode our life, and
Mhm.
how in tune we are with our own bodies, and whether we're listening to our bodies or not can bring an interpretation.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I like to think that every event is simply neutral until I look at it. And then, based on my life history or where I'm at that given day, I will decide if it's good, bad, or ugly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the truth is, it's neutral.
yeah. It's
How
like
I
no decision is good or bad. It's what you
That's
did
it.
with the decision after you made it,
Yeah,
on how you categorize it later.
Mhm.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. And that was I was going to say that speaks to something, and I don't remember what it speaks to, but how short my memory is in the moment today. But anyway, we were actually chatting about that today as well. Just before the show, Barbara and I were talking about how things in our lives impact our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Right, when we are stressed, when there's a lot going on, it shows up in our bodies, and that's another interpretation of what's happening in our lives and around us.
Yeah, I really think sometimes our bodies know what's happening with us way before sometimes our heart and our brain does. I know when I was teaching, there was a couple of things that would happen. It happens now, but it was really apparent while I was in the classroom every day. So I would sometimes get a twitch under my eye and, and think, well, and then once you sit with it, of course, it took me a couple of years, that was a signal for me that, I need to pay attention to what's actually bugging me or stressing me out, that there was something that I was ignoring. And as soon as I paid attention to it, well, then the twitch went away.
Right.
I know that's a tiny thing, but our bodies say so much to us all the time.
Exactly.
And instead of listening to it, we take pills.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there's a something. Let's just shut it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Being curious on what's really going on. I know from my Qigong training, we learn that different parts of the body can mean different things, and decide if that's what it means for us. And there was a time about 5-6 years ago, I needed to make some financial decisions, and I procrastinate on financial decisions. It's one of those things I just don't want to head on. And while I'm sitting there with it, I had my toothache. My mouth just started hurting and hurting and hurting. And again, I almost went for the pill bottle. I was like, well, what's that about? And then I was like, oh, wait, you have had all this training. Why don't you use it? And that part of my mouth in the Qigong training was like being afraid to make decisions. And I'm like, huh, yeah. So as soon as I made the decision, it went away. It didn't matter what the decision, it's just that I took the time to make the decision and say, this is how I'm going to proceed. And then almost immediately that pain just disappeared. Is so, and I all of us have a level of that.
Yes, we do. I remember years ago, I used to get a strained neck all the time. You know, that thing where you just can't turn because everything hurts. And one day, as it was starting, I stopped and went, what were you just thinking about? Like, where were you just? And I got what it was, and it went away instantly. And I've never had it since. Like, the minute I could feel, oh, yeah, that's starting to go, I go, okay, where were you? And immediately check that thought. And it's amazing. It was gone instantly. And it used to be quite a chronic problem. But now, never.
Wow.
Pay
That's
attention.
so interesting.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, we want sometimes I think when we're asking for healing or praying for intervention, it's like we have all the answers right there. And do we realize that awareness and internal acceptance that and then you have to sit with it and be uncomfortable with it to figure it out though.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. And I'll say me, I'm not always good at that. I don't like pain, I have to say. and I know that it's something I need to work on. Things like headaches. I was going to ask you, my muscle in my shoulder blade, my right shoulder blade, it came and it was stressing me out where I can't even driving, like turn my head properly. And then it went away and now it's back. So what is that?
You have to ask yourself, Cheryl.
You have the answer.
Right? It's asking ourselves, what is that?
Oh, jeez. You mean I have to listen to myself again?
Listen to yourself.
More?
And sometimes, here's the other part of that. We can't always say, well, it's some emotional thing I'm not paying attention to, because it could legitimately be some kind of physical thing we need to pay attention to. So I know for me that turned into watching my electrolytes and my hydration, because my body was doing some funky things, especially around my lower back area. And it was a physical thing that I wasn't taking care of for myself.
Right.
So
not to always
maybe you're not sleeping right. Maybe you need a new pillow.
I think that's probably what it is, quite honestly. But yeah, and that's a good thing to note. Don't always assume that this is something that you don't need to have looked at or get attention for, right? Because that wouldn't be good either. So that's a good point. But going back to what did we say? Perceptions and interpretations. I know that you are a spiritualist minister. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Modern spiritualism is about 150 years old. There's a spiritualist camp near me that's actually the oldest in the world. It's Lilydale. It's about an hour and 20-minute drive from me. And I got to serve there today, so it's right on top of my tongue there. But basically, it dovetails really nicely with the New Thought movement. In fact, there's a book that's written by Anne Gaiman and Ellen Ratner that does a really good job. It's called Self-Empowerment, which is apropos, right? It does a really good job of taking early modern spiritualist writers and thinkers and the New Thought writers and thinkers of the last 200 years, when it really get moving, and showing how those things are really overlapping. Where New Thought has a lot of language originally in like Christianity, or moving from Christianity to a something else in that understanding, whatever that something else means to you. Spiritualism doesn't necessarily take on any Christian verbiage, although the people, especially modern spiritualism, really sprung out of Abrahamic traditions as well. I think the biggest difference between the two is spiritualism's movement and study of mediumship and what that means for people's growth and connection to all that is, and not shying away from the idea that there's different layers of communication and inspiration with whatever we call the other, the universe, spirits, and then what's involved in there. So to be able to recognize actual memories from those that have passed and loved ones, but also the grander scheme of information that's available through your connection and your growth of your intuition. So there's a settling, a forward settling in spiritualism to say, let's handle this death question and what that's about, and say that there is continuity of life, and that we can study that and move forward with it, and study it, meaning even in scientific realms, right? Because it's a cross between science and philosophy and intuition. It doesn't just claim itself as a religion. Does that make sense? But it says, once we settle this death question and say, yes, there's movement, there's always movement, there isn't an end, well, then we can fully live life. We can embrace everything there is here, because that is off the table, and here are the reasons we know, and this is how we connect to that. So for me, that's the draw for spiritualism, is that we just take care of that question. And then study of things like mediumship. Again, if we talk about this whole idea of perceptions, mediumship is not just, I want to talk to a dead somebody, right? In fact, it's not that. It's how do I understand my connection to all that is and move forward with that in life, right? And how do I expand my connection and awareness so that I can move into wholeness and healing, so that I can express my talents, my talent base, my gifts, however you want to frame that, best in this life in service to each other. So, because I moved from, well, I didn't move. I'm still a spiritualist, but I'm serving a unity community, and they asked me to be there. So we dovetail so nicely, but I think sometimes the word mediumship is what hangs people up, and to understand that it's not just, oh, somebody can talk to a dead person. It's, yes, but so much more. And I think if, in the perceptions and the decoding of that word, it's really the same as what everybody else is doing, right? In under that framework, Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you explained it quite beautifully, how it ties in, with new thought, thinking, and you said you mentioned something about it started with Abrahamic tradition, and I was like, oh, what's that? It sort of tweaked my ears.
So it's any religion that uses Abraham and what we would call the Old Testament as a base, which there's a lot. There's more than Christianity, right?
Yes.
But that movement in that Abrahamic tradition, especially in the Western world, it permeates society, not just religion, but the way we view even our morals and beyond that. So does that make sense? So
yeah. So how does that relate to spiritualism?
Okay, it depends on how far back you want to go, but in terms of modern spiritualism, which started in the United States, in New York, is where modern spiritualism started, in Hydesville. There is nobody in that framework of the United States that doesn't have some kind of Abrahamic framework. Unless you're an indigenous personality, I don't know that you don't have some kind of framework there. So that's how they would. So a lot of the early, and even now, honestly, if you go to some of the services, you can see real remnants of like a Methodist or a Lutheran or an Episcopalian framework in order to move into that hour of sharing and lesson, or all of that, when people come together on a Sunday or whatever. And what for me, in fact, where Bolts of Love started, was recognizing that, but also recognizing this disconnect for people now, at least in my geographic area. I'll just speak from my experience here. There's a lot of people that even if they grew up with those, Christianity or Abrahamic traditions, or, whatever, they don't feel, oh, wow. I'm sorry, I'm just watching the screen change. They don't, a lot of them have recognized that framework so much in a dogmatic setting that even the loveliness of the message of love and neighbor and stuff gets lost because of however they grew up in, or their experience has been, in whatever label of that they came from. So they're calling themselves spiritual, but they don't want to be religious in any fashion. So we were able to meet people in places like a meeting room of a Whole Foods co-op, that doesn't have any setting of religion or church, and have these beautiful conversations about how they see the universe, how they're connecting to love, what is their experience of divine, how are they moving into healing, and what support do they need, and all of those things that, for a lot of reasons, I think, to deal with trauma or
Mhm.
in their lives, they don't feel like they can come into a setting like a traditional labeled setting, or even a non-traditional labeled setting.
Mhm.
Even the spiritualists have little centers, and some of them look like churches. And
Mhm.
where I'm serving at Unity, it's a beautiful, beautiful 130, 40-year-old building with stained glass and everything. But it looks like a very old church because that's what
Mhm.
it was. And even though the language is totally different, to meet people outside of that setting and say this is a safe setting, even
Yeah.
though the building looks like this, has been
Yeah.
part of the conversation and the perception and the movement.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've noticed often that, one of the least expensive places to rent from are churches.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, holding my service in a church would prevent my members from attending. It
Mm-hmm.
just changes the message
It
somehow.
really, yeah,
Yeah, it's the
yeah,
perception.
it is. And it's again, I think it goes back to the awareness for everyone and what is it really? Because of the look of that, I am so uncomfortable because of the
Mhm.
look, because
Mhm.
this is the setting I sat in and got told you're not good enough, or I'm unworthy, or you have to do this in order to gain favor with divine. There's all of those layers for some people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there
Mhm.
has been a lot of injury done, when you look at our indigenous peoples, and some of the things that have happened. I don't know a lot about the US, but I know in Canada with the residential schools that were run by Anglican and Catholic churches, and, condoned by the government, if somebody's been in that setting, they have been harmed, and that has carried forward. And so the idea of walking into a church would be a stressor. And even I found sometimes using reverend, having those three little initials at the front of my name also creates a barrier to some people. So I'm finding that I'm using it less.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I've learned it. I've been a minister for 25 years, but so what?
Mhm.
Exactly. I find the same thing. I'm right there with you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's just finding a way to be with people that creates the possibility for them to feel included, welcomed, seen. It's the
Mm-hmm.
reason why I put my pronouns with it, because I want people to know that yes, I'm going to honor your pronouns. If you tell me it's they, them, I'm going to be respectful of that. So I think, it's little things we do that can make such a big difference.
Mhm.
But while we're here, let's go for a brief little commercial break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these perception interpretations and definitions with Jenn Shepherd, who is our wonderful guest today. You're watching Out of My Mouth, and we'll be right back. Don't go away.
People of African Descent New Thought Group proudly presents Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village, Thursday, August 1st through Sunday, August 4th. Some of our greatest keynote speakers, some of our finest musicians and vocalists, some of our amazing and experienced panelists, and some of our fabulous masterclass presenters will be there for you at Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change at Unity Village this summer. Regular registration ends June 30th, so don't delay. Register today at padntg.com. Sponsorship opportunities are available at padntg.com. Volunteer opportunities are available at padntg.com. Go there now, padntg.com. See you there.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center, Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living, La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
And we're back. So, all right, Cheryl, where are we going next?
Well, I'm intrigued to talk a little bit more about spiritualism, if that's okay. So, because, something you said, Jen, and I've thought about this as well. There's two questions I want to touch on, because I know that people are curious about connecting with loved ones on the other side. So that's the one area. The other one for me is, I've often thought, in New Thought, we teach oneness, one power, one presence everywhere. That doesn't mean that there aren't any other dimensions or beings in other realms. When I say that it doesn't mean that, I'm not saying it means that. I'm saying it's a possibility. Is that not a possibility?
Yes, and I also think it's still the one.
Well, it's all part of the one. That's my whole thing.
Yeah,
it's all part of the one experiencing itself.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a quote I love. It's from an old science fiction show, but based on Carl Sagan. But it's, we are the universe made manifest, trying to figure itself out. And every now and then, the universe does need a change of perspective, which accounts for the all, because those are the different perspectives. I recently started using a fish tank metaphor, if you'll indulge me for a moment.
Yes.
for what you're talking about. So we know what a fish tank is, right? And it has all kinds of stuff in it. The fish and the bacteria and the algae and the food and the rocks and the, whatever is there. And if we took a little pipette or a dropper and took suck some up from the fish tank, would the stuff in the dropper be the stuff in the fish tank? And most of us would recognize it's the same, right? So I'm going to take my dropper and I'm going to have 10 slides, because I want to look at it under a microscope. And I drop. Now, are each of those 10 drops going to look exactly the same under the microscope?
No,
but they came out of the one fish tank, right?
Yes.
Now I'm going to let them out for a little bit, and they're going to soak up the atmosphere, and they're in different parts of the room. So by the time I come back to them, are they even going to look like what they did when I took them out of the fish tank?
No.
Now I'm going to gather them all up with my little pipette, and I'm going to put them back in the fish tank. Okay, so they were individual drops that had an individual experience, and I'm going to gather them all up, and I'm going to put them back in the fish tank. Are they still the original fish tank? There's still part of it there, but they also have part of whatever was in that individualized experience, right?
Yes.
So if I were to look in the fish tank, though, after I dropped them back in, would I be able to pick out those exact drops again? No. So all our individual experiences gets spread out across the one. Does that make sense?
It does to me. And so my question goes back to, again, does that mean that it's all in this dimension? Is
Well,
it like,
well, no. I
do you
mean,
know
if
what I
we take
mean?
the fish tank again, you could
Yeah,
lift up a rock and find a whole other thing that you didn't even see. So there's stuff that you can see, there's stuff that you can't see, there's stuff that you can only see if you've lifted up, moved it around, went through, and there's
right, right.
precedent. So there are works out there that talk about what what a medium has gleaned from their experience on what the unseen, what all those layers you're talking about
Hmm.
they look like. Here's the rub with that, though. Just like we talked about at the beginning, it comes through our own filter. So even when we're totally connected to other in a space, even if we're considered like an Edgar Casey in total trance with that or something, or silver birch, or everything still runs through our humanness to be decoded. So when we talk about it, it's in human terms, and not just in human terms, it's in our perspective of our drops, human terms. So,
Yes.
yes, there can be, I mean, look at the picture behind me. I mean, there's like,
Mhm.
yes, I totally buy into that. But what exactly that looks like, I don't know
We
that any
can't
of
know.
us can actually articulate, because
Yes,
we're still on a ledge someplace, and not back in the we're like
yes,
we're part of the fish tank and not all at the same time.
yeah, yeah. And that actually made sense to me, believe it or not. And I really like that. There were two things that I got from you that is a new perspective from me. And the one is that even though we go back, we are part of the one, there's changes that are happening within that one, right? Because when the drops go back, it's taking back the experience. So there's an expansion of the one from everything that we are experiencing,
Right.
is how I interpret it.
I would.
And
Yep. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then the other thing is, I absolutely agree with you, because I've often said, whatever it is, it's incomprehensible to the human mind, whatever it is, right? And then at the end of the day, it can be absolutely nothing, and we can be wrong.
Yeah, which is why we get to keep changing our minds.
Exactly. Barbara, do you have some wisdom to share there?
Well, I think the way we think about life and the way we interpret events really is a personal thing. We sometimes get caught up because we think it should be universal. Like, I think this way, so why don't you think this way? I think it's one of the big challenges when people get married, is that they don't actually explore all the ways in which two human beings will coexist in this one environment, in this one experience called marriage. And so there can be different ideas. And I remember teaching a course to a young couple, both professionals, had a great life. They lived in a beautiful townhouse condo. Life was awesome. They were getting married and they wanted to have a marriage course. And I'm like, absolutely, let's do it. And when it came time to talk about finances, that's where the trip came, because in that moment they split everything. They had a house account, or a collective pot, and then they had their own income. They did their own thing. And so I asked them if they were going to have children, and they said yeah. And I said, so who's going to stay home with the kids? Well, she is. And how is that going to affect her income? And what's going to be different? They've never thought of that.
Hmm.
Your plan had been, we'll just keep it all, the way it is, and we'll each throw equal amount into the pot, and all is well. And they were like, whoa. And so they had to sit back and really take a look at their interpretation of what they thought married life would be like, with the changes that are inevitable. They're going to come. And it was a really positive experience for them, but also for me to just walk them through all of the different ways that life can show up. Um, It just is what it is, and how we show up really matters. But they had to take a look at it from a new vantage point, and that's what perceptions are all about. Is I see it from my vantage point, but Jen's going to see it from a different direction, and Cheryl from a completely different one again. So who's right?
Mm.
And
And
of course,
yeah, and then if we move to integral theory for just a tiny piece,
yeah,
then you also start to try to integrate. The more you understand that, what does it look like? So it's not just standing in somebody else's shoes,
no,
right? It's also standing in their shoes and noticing what they perceive about you, not just how they're perceiving it. It's how they perceive about what you're perceiving it, right? Because even though you're perceiving something one way and somebody else is perceiving it that way, that somebody else can think you're perceiving it something totally different than what you have in mind. And then
yes,
and then you go one step further and you put the lens back here and you say, okay, can I see what all of them are perceiving and start to see how they are perceiving each other? So it gets complicated, but if we do that, then that's more what I feel like where the divine is sitting, is like, oh, I'm sitting over here. The universe
yeah,
in that oneness can take all the perceptions, but also look at how that perception is seeing that perception or that person and how they are thinking about what they think they're thinking about, and it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
But really, that's when we
Because
can,
they're perceiving what they're perceiving.
right. But when we can get to that point and standing even outside the circle to do that, then that's when we're closest to our oneness, I think. And then when we can start to really bring about that wholeness.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I think what you're talking about is expanding awareness.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what you're doing, is expanding one's awareness, not being judgmental, but certainly looking at things from the outside in and interpreting it in some way. Right? Yeah, that can get very complicated. When I was sharing yesterday, when I think of oneness, I think of an individual, our unique individual experiences that we are having as part of that one, not separate from. I think of a spider web. And looking at the spider web and how all those webs cross each other and, are so sort of intricate. I can't say it. I can't say it. What is it, Barbara?
Interconnectedness, is that what you're thinking of?
Intricately, right? Intricately? I don't know. How intricately they are connected, right? In these,
I know, yes.
yes. Okay. And that always fascinates me, and I think about that, and it makes me also think about this whole thing. We used to say 6 degrees of separation, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if I start looking at that web now, it's like we're 3 degrees of separation.
Or none, because we're
Or
all
none,
one.
right? Yeah, exactly. But in that web of oneness, that unique experience.
Yeah.
And
And
sometimes
Jackie,
the degree of separation is just how we're defining a word.
Yeah, exactly.
Or you could be saying one thing and I could be saying another, and we think we're different, but then when we define the words, we find out, oh, we're saying the same exact thing.
Yeah, exactly.
and Jackie has a question for you, Jen. Could you discuss the quantum living process?
Oh, sure. So the quantum living process, I have the binder sitting next to me. The research is like this, thick, thick research. It was brought together by doctors Gary and Jane Simmons, the program. They were able to formulate all this research into moving from our perceived stories into a truer story. So some people call that shadow work, working with our shadow. It's and then it's not just like So it's actually tackling, what is this perception I have about myself and where did it come from, right? Right down to tiny things like, why did I just get so stinking angry that that person cut me off in the road? Why did I act in that way from this anger? What does that tell me about me? To bigger things like, okay, so for example, about a year or so ago, I did just like super tear out, re-clean of my kitchen. You know, you tear everything out and you scrub everything and you find all the stuff that you didn't know you had and all the lids and all the things. Well, in doing that, in one of these cabinets, there was this bug nest, which is not what you want to find. But I went into a tizzy of, oh my God, I'm a terrible mom. I'm not good enough. Why is this bugs in my house? Why did I know? Oh my goodness, everything's going to come crashing. I mean, I just went like, whoosh, you know. So in using this quantum living process for that, and there's a longer explanation here, but what I was able to discover was that around the time I was like 8, 10 years old, my aunt's children had brought home lice from school. Now that's a normal thing. Things happen, right? But I can remember being in the hallway because she lived in an apartment at the time. So I was in a hallway with other adults and hearing adults talk about, oh, she just can't get it together. Look at how bad her house is. That, you know, all the things that judgments that happen. I didn't even remember that incident. And the incident wasn't even directed at me, but I was in the midst when I was not old enough to decode a lot, you know, in a way that was sustainable for me. Then somehow it left the impression of, if there's bugs in your house, you are not a good mom. Right. So I was like, oh, it came from all the way back there and it didn't even have anything to do with me, but I took on that message. Yeah. So, and then the other part is, how do we settle that with ourselves? So there's a process of not just recognizing it, but doing something physically so that our bodies understand that we are safe, that there's nothing against us, that we are worthy, you know, all the things that we tell ourselves in an incident that we're not. So that night, after I sat down with my reaction to everything, my kids and I turned the TV on and had a picnic on the living room floor for dinner, watching the TV, which is like all the things you think, oh, that's such a terrible, but we did it because I'm not a terrible mom and we can do things like that. And who cares that I found bugs in the kitchen? You just have to clean them up and get rid of them, you know? This is just, you know, so I know, does that help at all to understand but it works with, so what it's done for me personally is now when I have a strong reaction, I'm able to first allow it, to understand that I'm allowed to have the emotion. And second, to make a choice faster on my choice on that emotion than moving into a fright mode or a freeze mode or a defense mode or any of those things that we do. You know, and even if it's like, oh, I know I need 24 hours to process before I make a decision, I allow myself that now without any like shame involved, that I couldn't like come up with it on the spot or anything. But it's a 6-week process. The first 3 weeks is breaking apart the science and everything of the system. And then the last 3 weeks is actually working the system bit by bit and getting feedback and debriefing about what you've done during that week to work it for yourself.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's great. And then you live it, right? You take it into your everyday experience so that you are looking at those things and being, again, more aware and of having choices and things like that about how we react to things and how things are impacting us.
Right, exactly. Because you don't fix everything in the 6 weeks, but it's but the process stays, you know. So I can use the process when, again, if I have whatever emotion it is, you know. Sometimes in our culture we're like, well, well, you can't be too happy or too sad.
Mhm.
You can't have this or that, or, whatever it is, or this emotion is really bad and you can't express it. But to know that you're allowed to feel it. In fact, it's healthy to feel it. So because again, it's awareness on what's going on with you and how you're decoding your life. And then how do I want to act on that? Or do I even need to act on that? And it's really neat skills. And it's based on brain science. I said there's a lot of cool research there. It's taken a lot of this stuff that we've known forever and taken a lot of the work. I just lost his name. How terrible is that? Some of our early psychologists. Wow, it'll come to me after, and it's crazy that I lost it because everybody knows his name. But all of that work that we know about our brain and our psychology, and putting it into an actual workable context.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so many different ways of looking at things. William James. Jackie Compton says William James, question mark?
No, that's not the one I was thinking, but I mean, he does have relevance in it. It'll come to me.
That's okay. That's okay. I quite understand those moments myself.
I usually get the awareness about 3 a.m., so I'll give you a phone call.
Yeah.
That's
Or just after the show, you'll go, oh, that's his
there
name.
it is. That's okay. You can go onto YouTube and put a comment in.
Yeah.
I'll have to do that because everybody be like, wow, you know who that is?
Whenever I have that moment, I always think, could have had a V8. Silly commercial.
I don't know. Does people under 30 know what that means?
I think everybody's over that. So but you're right. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't know for sure.
Oh my gosh, that would be a whole nother topic.
I remember telling my kids one day that, I'll give you 2 bits for this or that. And they're going, what is 2 bits? Like, it's a quarter. I don't understand. Why would you call it 2 bits? So it's like I'm going, oh my goodness, we're in different worlds here. I was like, okay, let's go on to Wikipedia and let's find out what 2 bits is.
Oh, that's funny. My gosh.
But again, it's about perceptions, interpretations, and definitions. It's like, what does any of this mean? And what meaning do I put to it? And am I willing to begin to, and they could have said, what's a quarter? Thanks, Jackie, they probably did. The 25-cent piece. You're the best.
Carl Jung. Yes, whoever wrote Carl Jung in there is correct. That's the
okay.
There you go.
Fabulous.
Yeah, it's that journey of life and just how we interpret things. And I think arriving at a world that actually works well for all humanity or all life requires that we have a willingness to sit in discomfort, but to listen to other opinions, ideas, and thoughts. And instead of naming them bad or ridiculous or why would you think that, but going, oh, that's fascinating. Let me sit with that, or let me see what that means for me, or can I attribute any understanding I have that would, sort of work in that same field. And one of the big ones that I find these days is religion. Because I'm a minister, people assume I'm religious. And I'm about as far from it as you can get, but deeply spiritual, right? And so what is the meaning behind that? The different spirituality and religion.
Yeah. So before we end, I just want to share one thing that for me really has helped me in my life when I'm having difficult times, right? Is what's real and what's not real. And what's real is real for me, but it doesn't mean it's real for somebody else, because no 2 people experience the same thing the same way. So knowing that no, it's anybody else in my situation would experience this totally differently to the way I am, or interpret it differently to the way I am. So therefore, this too shall pass, and it's okay. Because it's not really real.
And we're down to our last 4.5 minutes. And so, Jenn, what is one thing you would like people to take away from this conversation today? One little tidbit that you think would be helpful.
Maybe to not be afraid to explore, not to be to allow the discomfort in exploring. I know I started reading a lot of blogs, especially like Humans of New York is a good example, where it's just all different kinds of people, and it's whatever they said in the moment, and sometimes you don't have any context for it, so you can just sit in whatever that means, and know that it meant something to that person. But maybe it brings you joy, maybe it's like, what the heck is that, maybe but are we willing to explore humanity, and be curious about humanity in all its forms? Because that's really, it's that curiosity, I think, and that's really going to move us forward.
I agree. What about you, Cheryl? What would be a final thought for you?
I totally agree with Jenn. Before she even said curious, that word came to me. Be open and curious. And that's exactly what you're saying, Jenn. And I like, explore. I love that. Explore, like not just to be open, but make an effort with that curiosity, to explore different things in different areas, and different topics, and about what makes us human, what makes us think the way we do. Vibrations, how do vibrations affect us? Sound, how does sound affect us? All those kind of things. I think that to me is what fascinates me, and what makes my life worth living, is exploring those areas. So I invite people to do the same. How about you, Barbara Jean?
It's interesting because I like the idea of imagination being used in a creative, positive way. And I think oftentimes we as people use our imagination to worry, to fret, to be upset, to judge, to criticize, to do whatever. We'll use our imagination in a way that sort of takes us down a ditch. Whereas if we used it from that place of curiosity, like, wow, imagine what we could create if all three of us, with all our different perceptions, interpretations, definitions, if we come together and share something, what might that look like? So we have the potential to use this incredible faculty of imagination and then combine it with the faculty of wisdom. And all of a sudden we can begin to create space for all of us. I may not understand the way you do things. I might not even like the way you do it. But could I sit in that and go, show me how you do it. Let's talk. Let's just create space for each other.
I
That would
love
be
that.
my final thought. Let's create space for each other.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenn.
Thank you so much.
You are awesome. This was really, really good. Cheryl, thank you so much. And dear Mark, we missed you immensely today, but we look forward to seeing you next time. And for everybody watching, you're watching Out of My Mouth on the New Thought Media Network. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, because there's always something interesting coming out of our mouths. Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.
Thanks, Barbara. Bye.
Bye.